All right, Chris, thank you so much for being here. Really excited to do this. Systems and system design has been something that's been kind of close to my heart for a number of years as we've been kind of leveling up at Manifold. So excited to get into this.
Nice.
I would love to, obviously we're going to get into Trainual, but how I'd love to kind of talk about the journey, because my understanding is that some of your previous business experience kind of led to the epiphany that led to Trainual. Is that accurate?
100%. So how far back do you want to go? The beginning?
Well, I mean, not like, I don't know, to the degree that it's relevant.
Yeah.
Let's go back to whatever you think is most relevant.
So it really starts in my first company. So when I was 14, I was in high school. I started this video production company that did live youth sporting events. And so I started it with a partner, a friend of mine, and we were just initially doing, soccer games and the talent show at our school and cheerleading and dance tournaments and things like that. But as high school went on and into college, we started doing, state level events and regional championships. And I grew up in the Boston area. So by the time I was in college, we're all around New England. And while I was in school, I needed to find crews that could do the events that I would book. And so the whole business was you'd find sports organizations, you'd contract with them to do all of their tournaments or games or whatever they had. And then I needed crews to show up and film those events. And so while I was in school, I needed to train other people to show up and look and feel and act like they were part of my business and part of my brand. And so from kind of a young age, I was packaging together what my business is all about to train other people, to get them up to speed, and then trying to operate almost like a franchise in some way and have operations that were just totally dialed in. So this kept going all through college. By the time I graduated, I had an office in Boston, employees working there, a fulfillment center, and we had started to do events across the US. So I built this directory up of hundreds and hundreds of camera operators in every major metropolitan area so that they were fully trained and ready to go for anywhere that we would book events. And I ran that business for 12 years before I turned it over to my operations director. He became president, and then a year later sold the company. So I had the amazing experience as really a kid of learning about the importance of systems and operations and process and SOPs as I was kind of fumbling through building my own business. And at the end of that experience, when I looked back, I realized how unique that was, that I had put so much attention into fine tuning the systems of, how we ship gear from one event to the next, and dress codes of what people would wear, and processes for how we would get video literally from the Jumbotron into the hands of customers walking out the door in, 10 or 15 minutes. It was dialed in. That was what was unique about my business. And so that became my next business, which was systems and processes and operations consulting. So I built this little consulting firm, and I'll skip through the details here, but basically the epiphany was as I was working with so many other businesses, they wanted to package together who they were, what they did, how they did it, what they were all about, so that their businesses could scale or feel turnkey like mine was. So that's the type of work that we were doing for them. And that's what led to Trainual, which is a online software, a training manual kind of platform, one place for your business playbook.
Wow. I mean, that's did you go to college through this process too? Or
I did. I went to a business school, called Bentley University. It's a school outside of Boston. What was so cool is I was running my video business. And while I was in school, I would have these professors that were teaching accounting or marketing or whatever, and they would let me use my business for all my class projects. Wow. And so it was like I would get an assignment, I get a project, and I would just build out the marketing plan for my company, or I would create the P&L or the income statement for my business and turn that in as my homework. But it was advancing my business, so it was a pretty good deal.
That's really fascinating. So you decide that you want to start basically a software business. Did you have a background in software, or how did you go about it? It sounds like you were. I always hate the word non-technical because it implies but you weren't a programmer.
No.
What was the MVP of this thing like? How did you go from an idea to first iteration of this thing?
Yeah, so I had glimpses of software. I had exposure to software. So once in my video company, toward the end of the business, we hired a contractor to build a software that would connect our e-commerce website to our network hard drives and the DVD robots. So basically, anytime someone ordered off our website, every half hour it would batch those orders, and it would send a message to our network hard drives to say, these image files from these DVDs, print those. And so then at the end of the day, we'd have a stack of, 50, 60, 70 discs, and an intern or something would ship those out. And so that was like an exposure to, wow, software is magic. It's cool that you can like dream something up and it exists. And then when I started consulting, the operations work I was doing, I was streamlining people's processes, and I had some ideas for, well, why don't we design a custom tool that cuts out a ton of steps for your business? And so I had exposure to just hiring contractors. So when the idea for Trainual happened, it was through some of those contractors that I said, there's just this basic platform that people could house their roles and responsibilities in the company and their basic onboarding. So I downloaded a program. It was called Mockups. I think it's still out there. And I found some theme kits, some SaaS like theme kits. And I just put a few weeks into designing the first version of Trainual by just slapping, rectangles in rectangles and making buttons. That's how it came to life.
That's crazy. That's so cool. I'd love to get in kind of the business building side of things, but before that, I'd love to just hear a little bit about kind of, you've been in this world for a long time, so it seems like you probably have sort of like a unified theory, I guess, of system design and things like that. And from what I've seen, both with, as we grew our business and then through some of the investments that we've made, some of the consistent problems that we've seen are like the lift on getting stuff documented in the first place is pretty material. Yeah. People don't want to do it. It's always, it's important, but never urgent. Two is like the training aspect of it, making sure that people do it. So not just like a one-time thing, but like, how do you ensure retention of the material? And then three is like almost like a paper, like an auditing kind of like, how do you ensure compliance with the process? Because as soon as you learn that you don't have to follow the process, you won't, and you cut corners, all kinds of stuff. So like, I would imagine you've seen all of those problems and all that stuff kind of factored into, and a dozen other problems that I'm not even thinking of. Like, what were you trying to solve for with Trainual? What were the common problems that you saw? And, how is it sort of the killer app for kind of doing this kind of stuff?
So the thing we're trying to solve for is that information in a business as you grow is either stuck in your head, scattered across all your people, or fragments of it are scattered across documents and in folders and on hard drives. And if you really want to scale a business, you have to operate consistently. That was what I learned through my video company, was that you can't show up at every different event and do them in a different way. That's would destroy your brand. You have to do things consistently. And so in building a business, you have to do things consistently. And if you recognize that it's our risk to have this info scattered and misplaced everywhere, then the problem for us to solve was centralizing all of that. Let's at least collect and gather all of this knowledge for people to have at their fingertips when they need it. So mobile app, web app, all of that. Wherever you need it, you can find this. And it's all consistently laid out. It's not a bunch of different documents with crazy colors and headers and different things. It's just all standardized. It's easy to find. It's all in one place. That was the first problem, was just centralizing this. Yeah. So when you mention how it's never urgent and it's a lift, it's hard to get started. The point I would make is you got to think, what's in it for me? Like, why am I doing this? Why would I even do this work? Yeah. And if you don't have some big aspirations of, we're trying to open a second location, we're trying to expand our business into this other vertical, I'm trying to get stuff off of my plate so that I can take on new challenges that I need to focus on to grow us. You've got to have some why, because that why is what propels you to do the work. It's what makes you write things down so you can hand it off to someone else. So I have this framework, this thing we trademarked, do it, document it, delegate it. because I believe in every role, every responsibility in every business, that's the process you follow. Where at first, anytime you're doing something, it's an experiment. You're testing it out. You're trying to figure out, is this the best way to do it? Does this work? Do I need to tweak it over here? And as you experiment and you refine how you do something, then you start to think, okay, I'm doing it the same way, the same way, the same way. And now it feels like a job. And entrepreneurs, people that are growth oriented or builders, you don't want to do the same thing over and over. You want to solve one problem and move on to the next. And so once you've solved that problem, that's when you want to document it. That's when you want to write down the instructions so that you can delegate it. So you do it, then document it, then delegate it. And by writing down instructions, you're freeing yourself up. You're buying back bandwidth so that you can tackle something else. So you've got to have that motivation of understanding, why do I want to get this off my plate? What does documenting this mean? That's what will inspire or motivate you to actually put in the work at the beginning. And then to your point about how do you get people to actually go through it, the training, the experience? Well, again, what's in it for me? Like, why would they care about that? They have to know that if they can adequately do this work and they can do it as well as you, that's how they can get promoted. That's how they take the next step in their career, is by understanding that this is the current best practice for the company, and then challenging themselves to create a new best practice, to level things up, and then eventually document how they're doing it to pass down to the next person. So it becomes this culture of just figuring out what's the current best way to do something. Now let me hand it off and pass it off to someone else, so it's a challenge for them, and then challenge them to come up with the next best way of doing something.
I'd be curious to hear, I have friends that have small businesses and things like that. And it seems like they may have read like the E-Myth or something like that, but they usually don't start this process or this journey until, there it is. Yeah. Love that book. My dad gave that to me in high school. And I was like, thanks, Dad. I don't know why. I wasn't as ambitious as you were, but an amazing book. But like from what I've observed, it seems like small businesses don't tend to do this until there's pain. Almost like it's not too late, but like they probably would have wished they'd done it sooner. And then also like startups, there's kind of these like tropes around, like, especially like pre-product market fit, when you don't know what the thing is, this idea around prematurely scaling or documenting before you figured out that you've achieved product market fit. Like, when you're advising friends or you're advising, I don't know if you do any angel investing or things like that, but like when you're giving advice to other people around the right time to start a journey like this, what do you tell them? Do you do it from the very beginning, or is there a more appropriate time?
No, I think you do it once there's some business that exists. Again, do it, document it, delegate it. Like, you've got to have some existing thing that you want to write down. But a lot of people, when they think of documentation, they think of process. They think of their operations. And I believe that you can document more than just process in a business. I think that the playbook, the entire playbook for your business, starts with the profile of your company. It's, who are you as a business? What market are you in? What customer are you trying to serve? And to your point about product market fit, it's, what is your market? Who are you as what is your reason for showing up, your mission, your vision, your values? Because even if you pivot what the company sells, you maintain a lot of that foundation, the DNA of who you are as a business. And so you document that, because that is important to train everyone that comes into your operation that you work with. And then you start to document roles and responsibilities and everything about your people and your teams. Because again, if I was to join a business, so much of getting oriented and learning about the business is, where do I fit in? Who do I work with on a daily basis? Who do I go to for different types of questions? Who runs each part of the company? That is documentation. And by packaging that up, again, that's something you can do early in a business as you go. You don't have to wait till you've got everything figured out. And then there's also your policies. You've got a handbook. You've got certain legal policies. You may have benefits. You may have just cultural norms of like what's okay and not okay here. All that can exist before you've dialed in and figured out every process for how you scale. And so I think there's a lot of fundamental things to document before you get into the actual processes. And then when it comes to process, you may want to document one task, two tasks, a couple different responsibilities, because those are areas of possible inconsistency in your business, or a lot of people do these things, and so we don't want to mess them up. That's where you should focus. You're not going to document everything out of the gates.
Got it. So it sounds like, from like a talent and onboarding perspective, like that's a big win, being able to kind of consistently communicate the vision for the business, where we're going, what our values are, why we exist, and then doing some kind of Pareto analysis on what are the kind of the critical 20% of processes that will have the biggest impact, either in terms of minimizing team frustration or maximizing customer happiness. Is that fair?
Yeah, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So what are we having to do over and over and over again? Let's focus on documenting that first. Absolutely.
Got it. What have you found in terms of, either with clients or as you've implemented, I'm assuming you've implemented this inside of your own organization, in terms of like the retention piece of it? So again, like you do this training, as I've, reading about behavior change and performance improvement and things like that, there's like there's like an optimal cadence to like maximize retention, or to maximize the likelihood that a new behavior sticks. Is there anything that you found in terms of best practices there, in terms of like, okay, we've unveiled this initiative, or, hey, we've documented this process and we've trained people on it. There is a cadence for review to make sure that they are still doing it the way that kind of we've designed it to do it. Have you seen anything along those lines?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got some built-in triggers in our application specifically for this. Like if you haven't touched content in a while, it'll remind the person that created it to make sure that it's still up to date. If as a user you've been assigned something, you can make any piece of content in our application kind of expire. So it reminds the person to go through it again in 47 days or 94 days or 2 years or whatever it is that you want as a cadence. But I think, again, it comes down to, why do I need this information? And if you as a user need to access certain information on demand because you're doing something in the business you haven't done in a while, then at least you have a place where you can go and look up and reference that information. So the retention, the stickiness, and the value of the content actually depends on just making useful content of stuff that people need to know. I was staying at the office late the other day, last night actually, and I hadn't been here that late in a while. And as I'm walking out, I was like, how do I set the alarm again? I totally forget. So I'm standing at the door, I fire up the app and I look for the alarm thing, and it's like, oh, there it is with the screenshots. So I set the alarm and I walk out, but it's not forcefully training people on stuff that they don't need to know right now. It's having the information available for when they do need it.
So it's easily retrievable. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Have you found anything in terms of like modalities for documentation that are better than other? Like sometimes you'll see, especially like with employee handbooks and things like that, people try to get kind of cute with it and do like GIFs and things like that, or using Loom to kind of record a certain software, which makes a lot of sense. But like, is there anything that you've seen in terms of like maximizing the effectiveness of documentation or best practices that people should keep in mind?
It depends on what you're trying to train. So for something that's like a handbook, like you probably don't want to fire up a Loom and riff on your harassment policies. Like you probably want that one in writing, and so write that one down. But if it's like teaching people about, you're requesting time off or your vacation or your sabbatical or some benefits, throw in the gifts and make it fun. If it's a walkthrough for how to process payroll, then a screen recording of actually doing that in the application can be most beneficial. If it is training someone on how to appropriately load the equipment into your van, then a series of images with like some arrows on them is most useful. So I think it really just depends on what you're trying to train, but you want to mix it up. If you've got a playbook or your documentation is all text, then people just be so bored. A lot of people don't learn like that, and so if you have some combination of video and audio and slide decks and PDFs and it keeps it fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I said, I mean, I would assume you're a customer or a user. How has that? I would imagine that there are some definite pros in terms of being able to dog food your own product as you build it, and forming roadmap and things like that. But maybe there are some downsides as well. Like, what have you learned maybe about using to the degree that you've used your company as a set of inputs to inform product development? Like, what have maybe you learned about like the pros and cons of doing that and how to do it well?
So for the longest time, I would tell our product team, like, we are our customer. If I want this, everybody wants this, right?
Right.
And for a long time, I think they listened to that. But then little by little, they started saying, but are we? Like, are you sure? And they had, rightfully so. So like when we launched, we always thought, Trainual's for small growing businesses, small to mid-sized businesses. We would put brackets on, 5 employees to 500 employees. That was kind of the loose number. It was like, you're big enough to be more than just a room full of friends, and you're small enough that you're not yet in like a skyscraper with 7 layers of management. That was our brackets. But as we've grown, we see that, our biggest power users are maybe between the 10 and 100 employees. Mm-hmm. And now that we have over 100 employees, it starts to be like, well, are we needing functionality that the majority of our customers don't need? So we think more critically about that than we ever have. Because as you get bigger, there are just different ways people collaborate, and you need different levels of permissions, and you need, things that maybe our average customer doesn't need. So it's really important to just know your persona or know your couple different personas. And instead of just broadly stating that you are your customer, like I always did, you've got to say, well, we are this customer out of our 4 customers.
Yeah. I'd be curious to learn how to what degree, maybe not at all, but I mean, you had already built a successful business. It was a service-oriented business. And then you make a decision to kind of start a new thing that is a product and, a SaaS type business. What maybe, if you can, and it's been a while, so it might be difficult, but if you can think back to kind of those early days where you needed to kind of learn how to build a different type of company, and maybe like how to level up as a leader as you found product market fit, and as you were finding yourself needing to add team, relatively rapidly, and you've got a larger organization than what you had before. What did you learn about being a leader of a startup versus a leader of like a service-oriented business and things like that?
So when you're selling a product, you're a lot more constrained than you are when you're selling a service. When you're selling a service, it's very easy for you to bend and say that you'll do whatever the customer wants, and so like if you are a landscaper, for instance, and all you do is cut grass, but somebody's like, hey, can you move my lawn chairs between the backyard and clean those off? You're like, sure, I've got extra time and I'll take your extra $50 and let me just do that. But when you're selling a product and you've got, a ball and all it does is bounce, and someone's like, hey, could this like split open midair and become a Frisbee? You're like, oh, like I wish I could help you, but like it just doesn't do that. Yeah. And so selling a product, there is these built-in constraints that you just have to accept. And so I had for years had this service business of my video production company, and then I had a service business of this consulting firm. And when I went to sell the product, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. These things will just like move off the shelf because the price is so low. Instead of it being a $10,000 service, it's a $100 a month product. So I must be able to sell thousands of these. It was actually a lot harder to sell the product. You had to sell the product in a very different way. And you had to kind of almost tee up exactly what your product would solve for people in a demo or in your marketing materials to lead them to your product as the perfect solution. Whereas in a service, it's almost more consultative to figure out exactly what somebody wants. And then you just tailor your proposal to exactly what they want. It's easier to sell. And so the sales part was the hardest thing for me, is learning how do we actually tee up people that want to sell themselves on our product.
I know that you, it seems like at least that you've adopted a lot of the kind of the tent poles that people kind of think of when they think of like a B2B SaaS kind of playbook around content marketing and some events and stuff like that. I'd love to get into that a little bit, but when you think back again to those early, your earliest customers, to your point, maybe the website doesn't look as polished as it does now, and maybe the product itself is a little bit more limited. Do you remember how you got over the hump and got some of those early customers?
Yeah, if you go to the Wayback Machine or whatever it is in the archives, you can look at our 2018 website, and it was pretty terrible. It's just like a broken WordPress site. the first couple customers came from my consulting business. So in month 1 of launching the software company, I hosted a party at a hotel and invited, 100 businesses and the press and tried to make this big idea, a big fanfare out of it. Yeah. And so we got a handful of orders coming through that. And so I had this circle of people that could give me testimonials and be warm referrals. And I was able to put them on the website. So that would be my first tip is if you're starting from zero, find some people, even if you're giving your thing away for free, find some people that can be testimonials, case studies, whatever, because then you can build them into your sales demos. You can put them on your website. You can get them to write reviews on the software platforms. And that really does create a lot of authority to have third-party validation like that. So that was the beginning. Then we launched on Product Hunt. So if you haven't heard of that, it's a website of applications. And that was a great experience for just getting feedback. It's a really critical early adopter audience. And we opened up the thing with no credit card and just said, sign up, try it, let us know what you think. So again, that early feedback was really useful because it told us what people didn't like, where they dropped off in the process. And then I emailed everyone on my LinkedIn. So that was the spam mode. But it was a all through email. I downloaded the list. I sent one-off emails to everybody on my LinkedIn, and I was asking for, do you know anyone in this space? Do you know anyone that does this work as part of their job? I just wanted to talk to people. Talking to people over and over again is what helped me craft the demos, the first demo presentation. And then we would put the request a demo thing up on our website. We started running ads, and it was those first cold traffic coming through ads through my first demos that really showed me, okay, this can work for strangers. Let's scale this.
Awesome. In terms of what you were paying attention. So, first of all, awesome that you were willing to a lot of my students, a lot of founders I talk to are very afraid to flip the switch, especially on something like a Product Hunt where, there's tastemakers and potential investors and, they're terrified of the negative feedback or whatever it is. But I know, I would imagine by now, you've got some pretty sophisticated instrumentation in terms of tracking retention and doing cohorts and all that kind of stuff. But back in the day, how were you getting feedback about, so you get some people to come in, they're either customers or people from Product Hunt or people from your paid ads or whatever it is. What were you looking at to see, hey, have we nailed this? Or some iteration work is necessary. How did you use, what kind of data were you looking at to inform product iteration decisions? Was it all qualitative? How did you go about that in the early days?
The only data I looked at was Stripe getting credit card charges that were successful. It was year one of the business, we made almost zero product changes or iterations. We had this prototype, this early version, and I thought, okay, if I can get 25 people to pay for this, then I should be able to get 250. I just got to go find them. And so year one was all about sales and marketing, and we made almost no changes to the product. It was just, are we getting charges, and then are those charges lasting? So I signed up for, tool Profitwell. It's like a Barometrics or something like that. And I was watching our average revenue per customer and our monthly MRR increasing and looking at some of those basic metrics. And I was looking at what we're spending on Facebook and Instagram ads because we weren't advertising anywhere else, so they must be coming from there. And so it was a pretty simple equation of we're spending this much to get customers, they're paying this much on average, takes us this many months to pay off my credit card, and let's keep growing that.
When did you start implementing some of the other, just your website is just a wealth of content at this point around how to do all of this stuff. When did you start to make investments in that, and what maybe have you learned about kind of content marketing as an important tool for B2B SaaS type businesses?
The investments in content marketing started the year before Trainual. So I had, through selling my consulting services, I had started this newsletter where I was recommending little hacks and tips for people to make their business more efficient. And so after sending that newsletter for a couple years, I packaged it all together. I made this tiny little book called 100 Hacks to Improve Your Business, self-published it, and I started sending it out to prospects on LinkedIn and asking them to meet up and saying, I promise there's a dozen things in this book that could improve your margins or whatever. Yeah. And so I was doing content marketing. I was writing. I had gotten a column with Inc. magazine on their website, inc.com. So I was writing 4 times a month in this column. And so I knew that thought leadership was important to set me up as a consultant. And so that just really translated into Trainual. So it was something that we kept doing in that first year. Shooting a ton of videos. All of our ads were just me or my brother walking down the street or sitting in our conference room, just talking about problems that people have in their business because we were experiencing the same problems, or I had in my last company. Yeah. And so I think our marketing was just approachable and authentic, and it was experience based instead of theoretical. And it resonated with people that, okay, this is they're experiencing some growth or some success. So let me see what they're doing.
A lot of the channels that you would use for distribution for that kind of stuff tend to perform better, I think, with people as the voice versus like the company. And it seems like there's a personal branding kind of founder aspect to it. Was that deliberate? Is that something that you recommend other founders do? Is kind of like, if you are even remotely willing to kind of be on camera or whatever it is, that you should do that? And if so, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think people like to follow people and connect with people more so than logos. Yeah. And when you mentioned E-Myth and I held up the book, I remember before Trainual started thinking about the most influential business people that had written certain books or whatever, that someday I aspired to be like that. And I think of the people just as much as I think of the book. And so I thought, in starting Trainual, if I can provide some of that, those lessons and share what I'm doing along the way, it's only going to help Trainual, and that people would probably rather listen to me talk than, a Trainual ad.
Sure. Yeah. And you've continued to do that. I know you've written, at least one other book, even since doing this. You also have been pretty disciplined about, and you mentioned like the newsletter kind of being an early manifestation of this, although it's more of like a one-way channel, but community building seems to be a big piece of this too. Like, you've got a private Slack group, you've got that summit that you put together. Yeah. What have you learned maybe about using community is it primarily a marketing channel? Is it primarily a customer success channel? How do you think about community in the kind of the broad scheme of things?
I think it's primarily a customer success channel, but then by the customers having so much fun, it attracts other people. It's like if you've got a really cool club or restaurant with a line outside, like there wouldn't be a line outside if it wasn't a lot of fun on the inside. And so we try to make those events and the Slack groups and the monthly calls that I host and the podcast, we try to make them fun on the inside so that people want to talk about them and tell their friends. And so the natural next step is yes, it becomes an acquisition thing, but it's so long tail. We don't see the direct results of all the investment we make on the website for potentially years, but we have a content team of 4 writers and, just churning out stuff on our website, editorial stuff. It's not about Trainual. It's like, it's like a small business publication. We have, a full-time person running my podcast, which has episodes every single day. We have a full-time video producer that's just shooting speaking events and putting out content. And all of that, I think, is super long tail, but it snowballs. And anyone that sees our content today and thinks, oh, that's a good idea, I should start doing webinars or something. We've got tens of thousands of pieces of content already done that hopefully will be a longer term advantage for us.
Yeah. When you think about so something like the summit, I know that I think it was David Sachs that I heard first mention this idea of he will advise especially his B2B companies to bake that into their marketing calendar. And the biggest fear is that all right, nobody's going to is anybody actually going to come to this thing? How did you how long have you been doing that? And what have you learned about putting events like that together? Now you've got a pretty large community, but especially how did you maybe overcome that fear to the degree that you had it? Like, what did you do?
That fear that no one's going to come, you mean?
Yeah.
Well,
That's a big ask. That's different
yeah.
than, show up for listen to my podcast, right?
Yeah. So this is our fourth time doing it. The first year we did 2 events, and the first event that we ever did was actually in partnership with Gary Vaynerchuk's company at the time, Empathy Wines. He had launched this wine brand, and we thought training is all about empathy and having empathy for the experience people are going through. So we held an event called Training with Empathy, and he had some of his people there as speakers. We had some of our people, and then we brought in, big name authors like Kim Scott from Radical Candor, and we did this just kind of afternoon summit, digital, all virtual, and we had 1,200 people or something show up, and so that was a great first effort. Absolutely. And so that fall, when we wanted to do our own event and we didn't have a partner, we had to start our own event called Playbook. We needed a big name speaker. And so we went through all the like Shark Tank people and, who are people that someone would recognize. We got Damon John to speak. And so he came in as a keynote speaker. We packed the day of just awesome executives at all these consumer type brands that you'd recognize talking about the operational problems that they solve in their businesses. And it was kind of like a way for people that are building businesses to just be a fly on the wall of how other brands are doing things. And it was so casual. Nothing about it is pre-prepared with slides and everything. It's just conversations, almost like a live podcast episodes. And so that second event, we got 2,500 people to show up. And so then the following year we got 5,000. Now this is going to be our 4th event. We're shooting for 10,000. We'll see how it goes, but it builds over time.
I would imagine part of it in your specific case is like those folks you're used to seeing those folks talk about just vision, pursuing your dreams. What are your morning routines and habits and things like not that there's anything wrong with any of that kind of stuff, but I would imagine even in a casual kind of setup, you're digging into like brass tacks. Here's how we actually get stuff done, which they don't get to see very often. I have to imagine that's part of your quote secret sauce, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we're so entrenched in operations and process and how companies work, that's all we're thinking about. So that's what we're talking about. And so, getting to hear someone from Uber talk about how they tactically found drivers in the first couple cities and how they started their grassroots marketing efforts, or hearing someone from, Strava talk about like their hiring process and the benefits that they offer if you work there and how they retain their employees, or hearing someone from, founder of Bombas, the sock company, talking about their like refund policy and why they instituted this and how it works for, retention and upsells. It's gold to hear some of that stuff for the products that we use every day. So it's been so much fun to run this.
I bet. You mentioned kind of retention and upselling and things like that. We have some mutual friends that are kind of in like the growth space, for lack of a better word. And that's a very common, like lever that people talk about. Either you call it product-led growth or whatever it is. With a platform like this, though, where everything is internal, and not just internal, but like critical to the business. You could argue like it's a source of IP. You could argue it's a source of value. Like a lot of those levers aren't necessarily available to you. How do you think about using the product to drive growth, kind of given some of the constraints that your specific business model maybe has?
Well, there's some ways that we can do it. And you make a great point, because a lot of what people put in the platform is like their secret sauce, but they're also using it sometimes to train their candidates that are applying to work at the business, or to train their contractors or vendors that work at other businesses, or to train volunteers, or, the seasonal employees. And so we have seen some virality from people that are, working with several businesses and see our brand from something that's shared externally, so that we get a little bit of that, but not as much as if it wasn't their secret sauce and they're just blasting it out. The other kind of viral loops in the product, I guess, other than just the assignments to people that work at your company and shift to a different company, is really, we have a whole template library. You can browse our templates through the website. And so for business communities, networking groups or business growth groups, we partner with a lot of those to create free content that you can just sign up and automatically preload your account with. Different vertical industries and trade associations, that's been a lever for us to be able to say, okay, here is process type things that are pretty standardized in your industry, or they're standardized for a certain product you might use. Like how do you send an email with HubSpot, or how do you process payroll with Gusto? These are things that aren't just your secret sauce, but they apply to a ton of businesses. And so if we can create that kind of reusable content and make it available externally, then that becomes something other people can promote.
Well, it also seems like it also increases the utility of the product itself too. And this, from the standpoint of, like we talked about, like getting stuff documented is a challenge. And so like, if I can tap into a library of thousands at this point of templates, either as a starting point, or I bet in a lot of cases they're like, oh, this one's better than what I was going to put down. I bet that's a hugely valuable kind of tool in and of itself from a retention perspective too. So you're able to kind of pick off multiple pieces there. That's interesting. I wanted to, systems kind of fits into kind of a large, it's part of a larger kind of thing, I guess, of operations or management or things like that. And from what I have seen, it seems like you're a pretty deliberate manager, leader, sort of in general. I know you brought in like a head of HR very, very early. You seem to be very thoughtful about team and company building and things like that. Like, what are some of the philosophies, I guess, that you have brought to Trainual as you've been trying to build it, about, I guess from like a broader kind of management or leadership kind of standpoint?
I think the overarching thing is realizing that your employees have so many choices for where they work that they don't have to be here. And it's my job to make this a place that people love being. And so before I started Trainual, when I was doing the consulting work, one of the things that I did to onboard myself into all my clients' businesses was I would sit down and do these confidential interviews with all their employees. And so I focused on businesses with typically 5 to 50 employees. That's who I was working with. And when I got started, so I would do 5 to 50 confidential interviews. And so over the course of working with 150 companies or so, I did something like 2,000 of these one-on-one interviews. And so I got to see these themes over and over and over again of people that either didn't feel appreciated, they didn't feel listened to, they didn't feel compensated correctly, they felt like they were kept in the dark about certain decisions, they felt like they didn't have a growth path, they felt like they had unclear responsibilities and expectations from the company, they didn't know how they were being measured. All these things surfaced over and over again. And so in starting Trainual, I wanted to be really intentional and deliberate about doing it right. Setting it up right from the beginning, setting clear expectations, creating growth paths, having benefits, paying fairly, transparently communicating on the company metrics, giving everybody a scorecard. And so I really credit my consulting business and all of my clients' flaws with my ability to set it up right. But yeah, it's been super intentional. And so we brought on our head of people at she was number 15, but she was consulting for us when we had 9 people. And so from very early, it was, how do we represent Trainual's culture and brand to the outside world? How do we set up a really great interview process that even people that get declined say, thank you, that was like one of the best experiences. I hope you'll consider me for the next job. We were setting that up from the beginning. I think it's paid off.
Are there any of those levers that you pull? I mean, obviously, in a certain sense, like your brand is just like the sum of all of the things that you do, and your culture is the sum of all the things you do. But are there any, were there any strategies, any initiatives that you implemented that you, as you think back, had the biggest impact in terms of, like, if you were to advise somebody who wants to be a little bit more intentional about culture building or team building, that would give them kind of the biggest bang for their buck, so to speak?
So Since the beginning, I guess we always had a once a week all hands kind of thing. At the beginning we were just 5 people around a table, and then it was standing all in the bullpen, and then it extended to Zoom to incorporate remote people. And I think that proactive communication about here's what's going on in the business across every department this week. Here's the decisions that we're making. Here's the things that we're thinking about that we'd love you to weigh in on. That creates this predictability where people know they're going to get information, and their minds don't have to wander, and they don't think that the company is doing things behind my back or whatever. So that would be one. The proactive cadence of having career conversations with people every 90 days, I think has been since the beginning something we've done, but really important. Saying, do you want this same job 2 years from now? Yeah. Do you think you're paid fairly? Like, what could I be doing better to support you to make work even better? Just any of those conversations. I feel like if you aren't giving your people a open vent, a chance to just let their feedback out, then it's bottled up, and it could blow up, and you don't want that. And
I'd be curious about that second one. Like in coaching conversations I've had with founders and things like that, we talk about, you mentioned Kim Scott, and she talks about like the three conversations and like past, present, future, and things like that. How the biggest piece of pushback I've gotten when I've advised something like that has been fear that their aspirations don't fit with the aspirations of the company, in terms of like, there's a hierarchy. There's only a certain number. Like if you're in marketing, what's your career goal? I want to be in charge of marketing, right? Like if there's only going to be one person in charge of marketing and things like that. And so they're worried that they will preemptively, consciously or subconsciously, like close doors for people and kind of force them. Like, how do you navigate those conversations well in a way that kind of marries what their aspirations are and how you can help them in their role and what they want to become with what Trainual needs to become?
You don't want to suppress someone's aspirations. And if they're capped and they've got a ceiling, then you're going to find that out one way or the next. And so do you want to be involved in that conversation, or do you want them to just put in their notice?
Yeah.
I think the better scenario is that you have that conversation and they say, oh, I would love to be a director of marketing, but Trainual already has a director of marketing. And then we can have a conversation that's, well, what do you need to do to become a director of marketing, even if it's somewhere else? Mm-hmm. And let's help you get there so that you can take your next role 18 months from now. And in the meantime, we'll still get tons of value out of you as a person. And we're happy to have you here. In that 18 months, what if your director of marketing leaves and now the role opens up? Or what if you split off marketing into now communications and paid, and you've got a person that really is great on the branding communication side, and your existing hire wants to go more into the growth trajectory? There's so many building blocks, and it's like a game of Tetris of how people move around in an org. And I think you just need to have regular open communication about somebody's aspirations, because then you think of them for another position. You're like, oh, maybe they would be good over here on this team, or maybe we're opening up a new market and they could be the leader in that market. Those things can happen. But if you never have that conversation because you're afraid to have it, they'll find the next job. Yeah. They'll just, someone else will have it with them.
That makes sense. What about for you? I mean, how have you managed to, not scale yourself, but grow like not everybody that starts a especially like a startup, as soon as you take investors, especially, and things like that, not everybody gets to go on the whole journey. Some people, they make it to first base. Some people make it to second. They bring in a more execution minded or growth type CEO or things like that. How have you managed to kind of level yourself up as the organization has grown so that you're still the right guy?
I think first it was an exposure to bigger companies. So when I was consulting and working with companies that were, $20, $30 million companies, some of them that had, 200, 300 employees on the upper scale, that was not my norm, but on the upper scale, I'd see how they're operating and think, okay, well, if I can advise this CEO I could probably do that someday, you know? And so part of it was just like having those examples that gave me the confidence.
Yeah.
And then it's always having, you know, groups, peer groups or mentors. So, you know, I for the longest time was in EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. I'm in YPO now. When I first got started in the software world, I joined SaaS Academy, this group by Dan Martell that was really helpful for me. And it put me in a room with other founders at similar stages, going through similar problems. And I would always be able to find people in that room that are, you know, 50 employees ahead of me or 10 million in revenue ahead of me. And you look at what they're doing and you take notes. And so I think at every stage, every year, I'm kind of reconsidering, like, do I have the right peer groups? Do I have the right mentors?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the constant temptations for a SaaS type business is moving upstream. And you said that, you know, you've learned that you said you used to think that your customer was 5 to 500, and now you think it's actually like maybe 10 to 100. But, you know, especially again, you start getting investors in the door and things like that. You want to keep growing. It's always there. That carrot is always there. How do you maintain the discipline, the fortitude, or whatever it is, to say, listen, like, I know that that's over there. I know that that could potentially be really lucrative, but we're 10 to 100 or 5 to 500. Like, this is our sweet spot. This is what we're going to do. How do you think about that? How do you navigate that?
So it's different for every business. So I don't want to give a blanket statement here, because a lot of businesses do go up market. Yeah. And a lot of it is not just the temptation or the forcefulness of their investors or something, but it's because they want to. And those were their aspirations from the beginning, but they had to start somewhere. Yeah. You know, the approach that we've had has been to focus on this small growing entrepreneurial business, because that's where the most delegation and transfer of roles and responsibilities is happening. Whereas when you go from a company that's 250 employees to 2,000 employees, a lot of times it's just replicating the same thing in different markets, just more of the same with more bureaucracy and red tape and all that. Yeah. And so my passion is for the, 95% of businesses that are grinding through this and struggling and trying to live a balanced life. And I know that our product can help them do that. I've never worked at big companies. I've never, wanted to support the Fortune 1000 or whatever. Yeah. And so the conviction is really about, like, who is the person we're trying to help? Who's the person we're trying to solve? Now, it's not to say we couldn't also solve the problem for, like, slightly mid-market companies or Shift eventually, but it just takes the product maturing and being there. And I think you have to know which customer you want to work with and then build for them, and not let certain customers drag you in any certain direction.
Got it. Well, along those lines, then, what do the next 5 years look like for Trainual? Where do you see things headed, either, product perspective, or what are you most excited about in the coming years?
The goal is for your playbook to write itself. So when, when I ask anybody, like, do you want one of these for your business? Everybody says yes. Like, yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah. All of the knowledge of your business is in your business already. You already do what you do. If people have this in their heads. And so our challenge is just to make it so easy to capture and collect and record all that information that it is centralized somewhere and you don't even have to think about it. So that's what we're working toward, is the playbook that writes itself. And
you have a unique set of anonymized training data, theoretically, to train something to theoretically do something like that. That's really fascinating. That's exciting. That's really cool.
Follow along.
Wow. Fascinating. Cool, man. Well, I want to respect your time. This has been really, really interesting. For folks that want to learn more about Trainual, where, of all of the various resources that you could point people to, where do you send them? What's most helpful?
I would just say go to our homepage, just trainual.com, however you want to spell it. We own all the domains. And then you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram is where I hang out. So just at Chris Ronzio.
Very cool. All right, Chris, well, thank you so much for doing this. Congrats on everything that you've managed to build so far, and very excited to see what that next evolution looks like. That's really cool.
Thanks so much.